Hey everyone, it's Tao at the Forge again, and today at FNM at Home they have Singleton. Now, in Singleton means that you can only have one of each card in your deck except for basic lands, right? So sometimes it's a little bit challenging to come up with a deck that can win easily in this. So I'm going to show you two decks that you can use that are pretty effective and can win pretty easily. Right, as you can see, I have actually 2 wins, and that's out of 2. And I actually got 2 really good cards. One was a Tamio Planeswalker card, and the other one was a Temple of Malice. Right, so both gold, both rare cards. Well, it says it will be at least rare. Right, so I mean, it's good to pick up 2 cards, and especially because if you can do it like fairly cheaply, you don't have to spend if you don't have to spend any wild cards to do it or anything, then it can be really good. So let's take a look at the 2 decks that I used. So I won one with one deck and I won the second with another deck just to try them out. So the first one is black. I just call it Black Singleton. All right. So let's take a look. We have in Black Singleton. Basically, black's a pretty strong color for Singleton because it has so much removal, and especially in the current standard, there's a ton of removal with actual threats, right? So here we have like Duress, right? So Thorn Knight, basically a 1/1 Death Toucher, but it can later on in the game, if you draw it, you can actually draw a card, and 1 life is not a huge deal to pay for drawing a card, right? So this is good early game and late game. Gutterbones is just recurring card draw for you, or a recurring creature that you can get over and over. Hired Poisoner, another 1/1 Death Toucher, can hold the fort for you and maybe sneak through some damage. Knight of the Ebon Legion, everyone knows that this card is just a sweet card and can really power itself up. You swing with it, and then you threaten the +3/+3. They don't let it go, and then you can just use your mana for something else, or you can give them the damage and also get a counter on them. Pilfering Imp basically is a 1/1 flyer that you can use for blocking, but also you can use it to basically duress your opponent later as well. Right, Agonizing Remorse basically is another form of duress, but you exile the card so it doesn't go to their graveyard. So some people playing their graveyard effects, and you can use this to get rid of those cards out of the graveyard. Blacklance Paragon is nice because it's flashing 3/1. Typically, you are going to give the Death Touch to itself, but it can target actually any other knight. So I've tried to put actually a lot of knights, and the good thing is there are actual good knights in this deck. Right, so okay, Boot Nipper. Boot Nipper enters the battlefield with choice of Death Touch or Lifelink. I would typically choose Death Touch, but it depends when you're casting it and your situation. If you're casting it kind of later game, when you don't have that much life, then maybe Lifelink is actually a good one that can kind of keep you in the game a little bit longer. Burglar Rat. Each opponent just discards a card and you get a little body on the field. It's not too bad. All right, so let's see. Epic Downfall. Exile target creature with mana cost 3 or greater. And again, it's exile, not put it into the graveyard, which is important. Heartless Act. So you can just destroy a creature for 2 and instant speed. This is basically an amazing card. Right, so removing 3 counters. Okay, you're probably not going to use that very often, but you could. And then destroy target creatures with no counters on it. Not a lot of creatures have counters on them, but still, you can just destroy a creature, flat out. Mire Triton, a 2/1 Death Toucher, and put some cards in the graveyard. You gain a little bit of life off it. It's okay. Let's keep going. Order of Midnight allows you to your Alter Fate allows you to get a creature back from the graveyard. It's a knight, and also it's a flying 2/2 for 2 later. So this is a super multi-purpose card. Smitten Swordmaster, because you have knights, a lot of knights here, you could actually use this late game to deal through a couple of damage, and it gives you a 2/1 lifelinker, which also keeps you in the game. Yarok's Fenlurker, again, similar to Knight of the Ebon Legion, you can cause your opponent to exile a card from their hand, but then later on, you can actually pump this guy up and sneak through a little bit of extra damage if you've got no other things to spend your mana on. Ayara of the First of Lochwain. Okay, again, you can sacrifice another black creature and use it to draw a card. So all these like crappy 1/1s and stuff like that later on in the game, they might not be very, very good. Like you might not be able to get them through. You can actually just use Ayara to, have them come into the battlefield. Your opponent loses life, you gain a life, and then you immediately sacrifice it and draw a card, right? Or better, you use it to block, and then after it's blocked, then you sacrifice it and draw a card. Right, Midnight Reaper basically allows you to replace creatures and with cards. So especially if you combine this with Ayara, Murder. Just flat out destroy target creature. Murderous Rider, same thing. But it also later on can put a 2/3 lifelinker onto the battlefield. Thorn Knight is not one I've seen a lot of people play, but it's a 4 mana, it's a 3 mana 4/4, right? Which is kind of weird. Right? Usually you don't get things like this. So it enters the battlefield with 4+1/+1 counters on it, and it attacks each combat if able. All right, so you have to be aggressive with it. But with all the removal you have, your opponent's probably not going to have too many different creatures on the battlefield, right? So, but even still, right, if it be dealt damage, you basically prevent the damage and remove a counter. So it starts with 4, and then it can attack, and then it becomes a 3/3, and then a 2/2, and then a 1/1, and that's when you can like sacrifice it or whatever. So Ob Nixilis's Cruelty is just a creature gets -5/-5 till end of turn, and then it exiles again. Farika's Libation is actually a very solid card. I think it's an actually undervalued card in this format, especially for black, because typically black doesn't have any way of removing enchantments except for this. This is the only way you can remove enchantments, and you can do it at instant speed with this. So, forcing your opponent to sacrifice a creature, that gets around indestructible, and also allows you black to destroy enchantments, makes this card like almost a must include. Playcrafter basically allows each person to sacrifice a player. Each player sacrifices a creature or discards a card, and again, you can make use of those crappy 1/1s that you got earlier on in the game that maybe now have like a burglar rat or something like that that's maybe now done their job. Okay, Dread Presence. This is actually a card that's going to draw a ton of hate from your opponent. People just don't like it. But it basically weaponizes your lands, right? So you can, whenever you put a swamp under your control, a swamp enters the battlefield, you're going to be able to draw a card, and then you lose a life. But I mean, paying a life to draw a card is not a big deal. If you don't want to pay the life and you don't need cards, then you can deal 2 damage to any target. So you can like basically ping a target and kill it. A lot of times just kill like a simple target from your opponent, and you gain 2 life back, or you can just do it to your opponent, right? But over time, like this could actually do like a ton of damage to your opponent. Eat to Extinction, just exile target creature or planeswalker for 4 mana at instant speed, and then you can look at the top card of your library and you can put it into your graveyard. So almost like a Surveil. We don't really have ways to get too much back from our graveyard except for Order of Midnight. Nightmare Shepherd basically allows you to get all your creatures back. So once you get this out, right, anything that dies just comes back and it's a token, but it gets its ETB triggers. And, so like now when you're combining with Ayara, she can sacrifice like a burglar rat. It's going to come back, except it's a 1/1, which it already was, but your opponent still has to discard a card. Okay, Rankle, Master of Pranks, deals combat damage to a player. Choose any number. So each player discards that card, each player loses a life and draws a card, and each player sacrifices a creature. So, I mean, Rankle's actually pretty good, depending on what you have, but mainly it's just going to draw you extra cards. Or, again, if you have these like crappy 1/1s and stuff, you can force your opponent to sacrifice a creature, and it gets around indestructible because they're sacrificing it. Okay, Revenge of Ravens is a little bit of defense. Protects you against these strategies that go low. This is one card that I would potentially replace, but it allows you to have some protection. And basically, every time your opponent attacks you with a creature, they have to lose a life, and you gain a life. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, Ritual of Sit, destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less. Just basically, that's your oh crap board wipe at the end. Spawn of Mayhem, just a pretty good one. You can, again, if you can swing in for 1 damage, you can cast this for 3. It deals 1 damage to each player at the beginning of a turn, and then at the beginning of your turn. Then if you have 10 or less life, but basically it's a 4/4 flyer for 4 that pings your opponent and you. But you actually have a lot of ways to gain life back. Cavalier of Night is removal on a stick. It also is just a great just a great body on the field, like 4/5 for 5. Is pretty good. It also has the 3 black pips, which are great for Grey Merchant of Asphodel. So Gary, allows you to gain X life, or your opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black for 5 mana, and this could actually easily ping your opponent down for like 10 damage. And especially if you get this and then you swing with it, it gets killed, and then you bring it back with where is it here? Where are you? Order of Midnight. Where are you? Order of Midnight. Bring it back with Order of Midnight, cast it again. Then that could easily be the finisher. Massacre Girl is again a way to get rid of your opponents, especially if they have a ton of small creatures. Okay, so Conrad the Grim, again, just a way to deal damage to each opponent and punish your opponent for putting cards in the graveyard. And then Erebos' Intervention, another way of actually getting by around Indestructible, because you're not actually destroying a creature, it's just getting -X till end of turn. So you can actually get rid of indestructible creatures this way, gain back a ton of life in the late game. This is again a very good card that a lot of people, I think, underestimate. If you do run out of cards, then you can also use Castle Lochthwain to get some cards back at the cost of 1 life, which is reasonable. Witch's Cottage, comes in tapped unless you can throw 3 or more swamps. Most of the time, you're going to have 3 or more swamps. Then you can put a creature card from back on top of your graveyard. So this way, you can recycle creatures a bit, and then 22 swamps. So overall, it's a pretty fun deck. It's pretty powerful. Black has some really good stuff. All right, so let's go back to decks here, and then I have the other one I won was Blue Singleton. So Blue Singleton, you can see, is just straight up Persistent Petitioners, right? So we have 38 Persistent Petitioners. Now, the good thing about Persistent Petitioners, is that you actually only need to get 4 of them, and then you can put as many in your deck as you want, right? So you don't have to spend like 38 common cards on it, right? So you just need 4, and they're common. So I mean, this deck is super. I think a lot of people underestimate how powerful this deck is. I took one petitioner out to get a Medomai's Prophecy. You're probably not going to draw this, but I actually had this in my opening hand. But basically, so the first ability is good because you can scry 2, and you can get either the lands you need down or more petitioners, depending on what you need potentially. Then the second one, of course, you're going to choose Persistent Petitioners, and when you cast the spell at the chosen name, you draw 2 more cards, so you can draw 2 more lands or another land in Petitioner. You get more of, basically, you're not going to run out of gas if you get this, and for only 2 mana, it's not too bad, right? And then you, of course, have your 38 Persistent Petitioners, which I'll talk about in a moment. A Castle Vantress, which you're probably not going to use, but it will allow you to scry into more Petitioners later in the game if you need. But if you're going that long, you're probably lost anyways. But it's it doesn't really hurt to have this in there. 20 islands, and that's basically the deck. Right, so here's the thing with Persistent Petitioners, is that, okay, typically you get this 1 tap, target player puts the top card of their library into the graveyard. Okay, so that's not that great, right? But when you have 4 advisors, right, then you can tap 4, and the target player puts 12 cards. 12! That's like a quarter of their starting deck into the graveyard, which is really brutal, right? So, and the thing is, what you do, don't do this on your turn. You can activate this at instant speed, right? So if your opponent's swinging in, and they've got a decent body on them, 1/3 is decent, you can block with them, right? And then tap them, drop 12. So typically in the late game, you'll have or mid game, you'll have about 4 mana out. Your opponent will swing with a creature. You block with one of your Persistent Petitioners. You tap 4. They mill 12. Your next turn, you put 2 more out. And then your opponent swings again. Maybe you block with 2. You tap them. You tap the ones that were blocked, right? And then and then you just keep on milling them over and over again. And because they're good blockers, and because you have so many of them, and they're so cheap, you only have to mill them out like 3 or 4 times, and then they're just going to be done, right? Especially if they have like something like card draw strategy or something like that. So, anyways, that's it. So with these two, you should be able to get easy 2 wins, and then you'll be able to get these easy card rewards today in FNM at home. So if you, oh, by the way, I also put links in the description for the to the card deck, so you don't have to actually construct them, card by card. You can just export them into Arena. So anyways, if you like the decks, please remember to like and subscribe. Don't forget to comment if you have a better example or if you have replacement cards. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.